There is a specific moment in any genuine inquiry when the separate threads stop being separate. When the evidence that has been arriving from multiple independent directions, each thread compelling in its own right, each pointing beyond the boundaries of the conventional framework in its own specific way, suddenly reveals itself as a single coherent pattern rather than a collection of anomalies that happen to share the characteristic of resisting conventional explanation. That moment is not the end of the inquiry. It is its transformation. The inquiry that began as the pursuit of specific answers to specific questions becomes, at that moment, something larger. The recognition of a structure whose existence explains not just the specific anomalies that initiated the inquiry, but the full range of evidence that a widening circle of honest attention has been accumulating. The questions do not stop. They deepen. But the depth they reach is no longer the depth of individual puzzles awaiting individual solutions. It is the depth of a single reality whose full dimensions are only beginning to become visible. That moment is where this video begins. Not at the beginning of the inquiry that this channel has been conducting across its full body of content has been building toward this moment from the beginning, through every layer of evidence examined and every thread followed to its deepest available point. But at the specific threshold at which the convergence of those threads produces something that none of them produces individually, the recognition that the new revelations arriving from multiple directions simultaneously are not separate developments that happen to be occurring in the same historical moment. They are aspects of a single unfolding, facets of a disclosure whose full dimensions no single field of evidence, no single category of inquiry, no single tradition of knowledge has ever been able to hold alone. The convergence is arriving from directions that have historically been kept separate, by the institutional divisions of academic disciplines, by the cultural divisions between scientific and spiritual frameworks, by the deliberate suppression of the specific connections between bodies of evidence whose convergence would make the hidden truth visible in a way that the institutional framework has always had strong reasons to prevent. Those separations are collapsing, not because any single institution has decided to permit their collapse. The institutional resistance to the convergence remains as strong as it has ever been, and in some dimensions stronger, because the approaching visibility of the hidden truth is producing the specific intensification of defensive response that always characterizes an institutional framework that is losing its capacity to contain what it has been managing. The separations are collapsing because the evidence itself is producing the convergence across so many independent vectors simultaneously that the maintenance of the separations is requiring a degree of active effort that the institutions invested in maintaining them are finding increasingly difficult to sustain. Drop the word truth in the comments right now if something in the opening of this video is landing with the specific quality of recognition rather than the specific quality of new information. If what you are encountering here is something you have been approaching from your own direction of inquiry and are now finding described from an angle that makes the pattern you have been sensing more visible than it has been before, hit the like button to help this reach the people who are doing the same inquiry from their own directions and have not yet found the point at which the threads converge. Share it with someone whose honest attention has been producing questions that the conventional frameworks have never adequately answered. And if you want to support this work, the Super Chat is open, independent, unsponsored, following the convergence wherever it leads. The congressional disclosure process is the most publicly visible dimension of the current convergence, and the one that has received the most attention in the mainstream conversation about UAP and extraterrestrial reality. But it is not the most significant dimension of the convergence. It is the most visible precisely because it operates within the institutional framework, because it uses the language and the mechanisms of official government process to produce acknowledgments that the institutional framework has always been organized to prevent. Its visibility is a function of its institutionality, and its institutionality is also its limitation. What the congressional disclosure process can acknowledge is bounded by what the institutional framework can absorb without reorganizing itself in ways that the people who benefit most from its current configuration are not willing to permit. The congressional hearings are significant. The whistleblower testimonies are significant. The official acknowledgement that unidentified aerial phenomena are real and that their origin is not fully understood is significant. But they are the surface layer of a convergence whose deeper dimensions are not accessible through institutional channels and are not going to be disclosed by institutional processes operating within the boundaries of what the institution can absorb. The deeper dimensions are being disclosed by the convergence itself, by the specific pattern that emerges when the congressional testimony is placed alongside the ancient records, alongside the contact research, alongside the genomic anomalies, alongside the quantum physics, alongside the consciousness research, alongside the archaeological discoveries that the mainstream narrative has never adequately explained. That pattern is not produced by any single one of these bodies of evidence. It is produced by their convergence, and it is a pattern whose implications are larger than the implications of any individual revelation, however significant, because it describes not just the existence of non-human intelligence, but the specific nature of its relationship to human civilization across the full span of that civilization's development and the specific nature of the threshold that the current convergence of revelations is marking. The pattern that emerges from the convergence of these independent bodies of evidence is not a theory. It is not a framework imposed on the evidence from outside in order to make it cohere. It is what the evidence itself produces when examined without the prior commitment to any conclusion that the existing frameworks have determined in advance, and what it produces, with a consistency that becomes more rather than less pronounced as additional bodies of evidence are added to the examination, is a description of human history and human development that differs from the conventional narrative not in its peripheral details, but in its central organizing principle. The conventional narrative organizes human history around the principle of self-generated development. The human species, in this framework, began in ignorance and has been moving through the accumulated effort of its own intelligence and creativity toward progressively greater knowledge and capability. The setbacks are acknowledged. The injustices are acknowledged. The catastrophic failures of human judgment that have produced suffering on scales that the comfortable distance of historical perspective tends to reduce to data are acknowledged. But the fundamental trajectory in the conventional narrative is one of autonomous human development, of a species pulling itself forward by its own intelligence, in a universe that is indifferent to the outcome, toward a future that is not guaranteed, but that the record of accumulated achievement suggests is at least possible. The pattern that the convergence of the current bodies of evidence produces is organized around a different principle, not the replacement of the human achievement, the genuine intelligence, the genuine creativity, the genuine courage and compassion, and reaching beyond the current limit that the human record genuinely contains, but the contextualization of it within a framework that the conventional narrative has always been too small to accommodate, the framework of a development that has been guided, that has been accompanied, across the full span of its history, by presences whose relationship to the human development they have been accompanying is not the relationship of indifferent observers in an indifferent universe, but the relationship of invested participants in a process whose outcome matters to them in ways that the evidence consistently points toward as genuine rather than incidental. The new revelations that are arriving simultaneously from multiple directions are not producing this framework. They are confirming it. The framework has always been present in the evidence, in the ancient records that the conventional narrative has always classified as mythology, in the contact testimonies that the conventional framework has always classified as delusion or fabrication, in the anomalies across multiple fields of scientific inquiry that the conventional framework has always classified as puzzles awaiting eventual conventional explanation. What the current convergence is producing is not a new framework, but the critical mass of evidence from sufficiently diverse and sufficiently credible sources that the classification strategies that have always been used to keep the individual pieces of evidence safely contained within the conventional framework are no longer adequate to the volume and the diversity of what needs to be contained. The genomic research is the area where the convergence is producing its most technically precise and most institutionally difficult results. The ancient DNA research that has transformed paleoanthropology over the past decade, the sequencing of genomes from archaeological specimens that has revealed the existence of previously unknown human relatives, the extent of interbreeding between modern humans and archaic populations, and the specific genetic contributions of those archaic populations to the modern human genome, is producing results that the conventional framework for understanding human evolution is struggling to accommodate. The Denisovan contribution to the genomes of modern human populations in Southeast Asia and the Pacific includes specific genetic sequences whose functional significance in immune response, in altitude adaptation, and in neurological development cannot be explained as the random inheritance of archaic DNA through occasional interbreeding. The sequences are too specific, too functionally significant, and too consistently present in the populations that carry them to be the product of the random process that the conventional account of archaic admixture describes. The work being done at the frontier of epigenetics is equally significant and equally difficult for the conventional framework to accommodate. The discovery that specific experiences, specific environmental exposures, specific psychological states, specific qualities of relationship and of inner life produce heritable changes in gene expression that are transmitted to subsequent generations through mechanisms that do not involve changes to the DNA sequence itself is a discovery whose implications for the conventional understanding of evolution are only beginning to be worked through. If the specific experiences of specific individuals can produce heritable changes in the gene expression of their descendants, then the boundary between the individual and the lineage, between the specific history of a single life and the biological inheritance of the generations that follow it, is not where the conventional framework places it. And the possibility that the specific experiences of human beings who have been in genuine contact with non-human intelligences across the full span of human history have produced heritable changes in the gene expression of the human lineage as a whole is a possibility that the epigenetic research has opened in a way that the conventional framework has not yet begun to seriously examine. The archaeological discoveries that continue to accumulate from sites that the conventional timeline of human development has always struggled to explain are adding their own layer to the convergence. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, the complex of megalithic structures whose construction has been dated to approximately 11,600 years ago, making it the oldest known example of monumental architecture on Earth by several thousand years, predating the agricultural revolution that the conventional narrative identifies as the prerequisite for the kind of social organization that monumental construction requires, is the most dramatic single example of this category of evidence. The conventional explanations for how a population of hunter-gatherers constructed and maintained a complex of this scale and sophistication without the agricultural surplus that the conventional narrative requires as the precondition for such undertakings have never been adequate to the scale of what the site actually contains. But Göbekli Tepe is not alone. The ongoing excavations at Karahan Tepe, at the dozens of related sites in the same region that are only beginning to be systematically investigated, are revealing a complex of megalithic construction activity across a geographic area and a time period that the conventional narrative of human development has no adequate framework for explaining. The specific astronomical orientations of these structures, the specific alignment of their carved pillars with stellar configurations that would have been visible at the specific dates their construction has been assigned to, suggest a level of astronomical knowledge and a degree of deliberate astronomical encoding in the architecture that is inconsistent with the conventional account of the cognitive and cultural capacities of the populations credited with building them. The carbon dating anomalies at multiple archaeological sites across the world, the specific dates produced by radiometric analysis that place significant human activity, significant architectural construction, and significant astronomical knowledge at periods that predate the conventional timeline of human cognitive development, are accumulating to the point where the conventional timeline itself is under pressure from multiple independent directions simultaneously. The underwater archaeological sites that are being discovered as improved survey technology allows systematic investigation of the continental shelf areas that were above sea level during the last ice age. Maximum are adding another dimension to this pressure. The structures being identified at sites off the coast of India, off the coast of Japan, and in multiple locations in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico suggest the existence of human settlements and human architectural activity at dates that the conventional timeline of human development does not accommodate. The quantum physics research is the dimension of the convergence that receives the least attention in the mainstream conversation about extraterrestrial reality and hidden truth, and that has the most far-reaching implications for the framework that the convergence as a whole is producing. The specific results of quantum experiments conducted over the past 3 decades the Bell inequality violations that definitively rule out local hidden variable theories, the quantum erasure experiments that demonstrate the retroactive influence of observation on what has already occurred, the growing body of evidence from quantum biology that quantum effects play a functional role in biological processes including photosynthesis, bird navigation, and potentially neural processing, are producing a picture of the relationship between consciousness and physical reality that is irreconcilable with the materialist framework that has defined mainstream Western science for 3 centuries. The irreconcilability is not a problem that more research will eventually solve within the existing framework. It is a signal that the existing framework is not adequate to what the research is showing. The specific results of the quantum experiments are not anomalies awaiting conventional explanation. They are demonstrations of a feature of reality that the conventional framework does not have conceptual space for, the feature that the relationship between consciousness and the physical world is not the relationship of an observer passively recording an independently existing reality, but the relationship of a participant whose specific quality of observation is constitutive of the specific configuration of reality that is observed. That is not a mystical claim. It is a mathematical consequence of the experimental results, and its implications for the conventional narrative of human development, for the idea of a species developing autonomously in an indifferent universe toward a future that is not guaranteed, are more radical than the mainstream conversation about quantum physics has been willing to engage with. The convergence of these bodies of evidence, genomic, archaeological, quantum physical, contact research, institutional disclosure, is producing a picture of reality that is genuinely extraordinary. And the honest engagement with that picture requires something that the momentum of this kind of inquiry can sometimes obscure: the consistent distinction between what the evidence actually demonstrates and what it suggests, between what can be stated with confidence and what remains genuinely uncertain. That distinction is not a retreat from the inquiry, it is its integrity. The hidden truth, whatever its full dimensions, is not served by the replacement of one inadequate framework with another, by the substitution of the materialist consensus that has always been too small for the evidence with a counter-narrative that is equally certain about things that the evidence supports only partially or probabilistically. The honest inquiry holds both the genuine weight of the convergence and the genuine uncertainty of its interpretation simultaneously. It does not resolve that tension prematurely. It lives in it because the tension is itself a form of accuracy, an accurate representation of where the evidence actually is, rather than where the desire for complete answers would prefer it to be. With that clarity established, the convergence is real and its implications are significant. The specific picture that emerges when the bodies of evidence examined in this video are placed alongside each other without the institutional filters that have kept them separate is a picture of human development that differs from the conventional narrative in ways that matter for how every human being alive today understands their situation and their possibilities. Not because understanding the situation differently is comfortable, it is not, but because understanding it accurately is the prerequisite for navigating it wisely. The picture is this: the development of the human species has not occurred in the isolation that the conventional narrative assumes. The evidence from multiple independent fields consistently points toward the presence of external influence that is not random, not accidental, and not indifferent to the outcome of the development it has been accompanying. The specific nature of that influence, its origin, its intentions, the specific quality of the relationship between the influencing intelligence and the civilization being influenced, is the dimension of the picture where the evidence is most convergent in pointing toward a conclusion while being most genuinely uncertain about its specific details. The influence is real. The uncertainty is about its precise character and its precise source, and that uncertainty deserves to be preserved rather than resolved prematurely by the adoption of any particular interpretive framework, however compelling. The preservation of that uncertainty is not a failure of the inquiry. It is its most important achievement, because the capacity to hold genuine uncertainty with genuine equanimity, to allow the evidence to point toward conclusions that are significant without demanding that those conclusions be more certain than the evidence supports, is precisely the quality of consciousness that the most serious engagement with this material consistently identifies as the prerequisite for genuine understanding. rather than the adoption of a belief system that is more satisfying than accurate. The new revelations arriving from multiple directions simultaneously are accelerating the convergence. But they are not resolving the uncertainty. They are deepening it in the specific way that genuine evidence always deepens genuine uncertainty. By making the question more precise, by ruling out some of the possible answers, by narrowing the range of what the evidence is consistent with, without arriving at the single definitive answer that the desire for certainty is always reaching for. The congressional testimony is real evidence. It rules out some of the explanations that the conventional framework has offered for the UAP phenomenon. It does not rule in a specific alternative explanation with the precision that definitive proof would require. The genomic anomalies are real evidence. They are inconsistent with a purely self-generated account of human development. They do not prove a specific alternative account of how those anomalies were introduced. The quantum experiments are real evidence. They are inconsistent with the materialist framework that treats consciousness as an epiphenomenon of physical processes. They do not prove a specific alternative account of the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. What the convergence of all of this evidence produces is not proof of a specific hidden truth. It is the progressive narrowing of the space of possible truths toward a region that the conventional narrative cannot occupy, and that the evidence from multiple independent directions consistently points into. The specific location within that region, the specific configuration of the hidden truth that the evidence is pointing toward, remains genuinely uncertain. But the existence of the region is not uncertain, and the recognition of its existence, the recognition that the conventional narrative is not adequate to the full body of available evidence, that something beyond the conventional framework is required to account for what the convergence is producing, is itself a form of knowledge. Not the knowledge that the hidden truth is exactly what any particular tradition or any particular contact transmission or any particular alternative framework claims it is, but the knowledge that the hidden truth is larger than the consensus reality that has always been too small to hold it. That knowledge is where the honest inquiry arrives, not at a destination that answers every question and resolves every uncertainty, at a quality of relationship to the genuine complexity of what the evidence is showing, a quality of presence with the full dimensionality of the real, that is more honest, more useful, and more ultimately satisfying than any premature conclusion, however compelling, that closes down the inquiry before the evidence has been fully honored. The new revelations will continue to arrive. The convergence will continue to accelerate. And the specific quality of consciousness that is best equipped to receive what the convergence is producing, honest enough to follow the evidence wherever it leads, grounded enough to hold genuine uncertainty without the anxiety that drives premature resolution, open enough to allow the pattern that the evidence produces to reorganize the framework rather than being forced into a framework that is already in place. That quality is what this channel has always been building. Not toward a specific conclusion that can be stated in advance of the evidence that supports it. Toward the specific quality of awareness that can receive whatever the evidence actually shows, with the full depth of presence and the full integrity of honest attention that the genuine inquiry has always required, and that the extraordinary nature of what the evidence is converging on genuinely deserves. There is a specific quality of honesty that the genuine inquiry always eventually demands, a quality that is different from the honesty of following the evidence wherever it leads, which this channel has always practiced, and different from the honesty of preserving genuine uncertainty rather than resolving it prematurely into false certainty, which this channel has always advocated. It is the honesty of acknowledging what the inquiry itself is and what it is not, what it can deliver and what it cannot, what the convergence of the evidence genuinely produces, and what the desire for a complete and coherent picture of the hidden truth sometimes adds to what the evidence actually supports. That honesty is not a retreat from the inquiry, it is its deepest expression. Because the hidden truth, whatever its full dimensions, whatever the specific configuration of the reality that the conventional narrative has always been too small to hold, is not served by a conversation that gradually replaces one form of certainty with another. That replaces the materialist consensus with an alternative consensus that is equally confident about things that remain genuinely uncertain. That allows the momentum of a compelling narrative to carry the inquiry beyond the boundary of what the evidence actually demonstrates and into the territory of what the narrative requires the evidence to demonstrate in order to remain compelling. The convergence is real. The pattern that emerges from the independent bodies of evidence examined across this channel is real. The inadequacy of the conventional narrative to the full body of available evidence is real. The existence of non-human intelligence and its relationship to human development is, at this point in the disclosure process, supported by evidence that the honest examiner cannot simply dismiss. These things are real, and they are significant, and they deserve the full seriousness of genuine inquiry, rather than the dismissal of a framework that has never been adequate to what it was dismissing. But the specific content of the hidden truth, the precise nature of the non-human intelligences, their intentions, their relationship to the specific human development they have been accompanying, the specific destination of the long curriculum that the evidence points toward, these things remain genuinely uncertain in ways that the momentum of a compelling narrative can obscure if the inquiry is not careful to maintain the distinction between what the evidence demonstrates and what the narrative adds to the evidence in order to make it coherent. The maintaining of that distinction is the most important thing this channel does. More important than any specific piece of evidence examined. More important than any specific connection made between independent bodies of evidence. More important than the specific quality of the narrative that the convergence produces, however compelling that narrative is, and however genuinely it points toward something that the conventional framework cannot accommodate. Because the capacity to distinguish between what the evidence actually shows and what the desire for a complete picture adds to the evidence is the capacity that makes genuine understanding possible, rather than the adoption of a belief system that is more satisfying than accurate. The new revelations will continue to arrive. Some of them will be genuine, will add real evidence to the convergence, will narrow the genuine uncertainty in ways that bring the hidden truth closer to visibility. Some of them will not be genuine, will be the product of the same human tendency to find patterns and to fill the gaps in incomplete patterns with what the existing framework suggests should be there, that the conventional narrative has always suffered from, now operating within the alternative framework rather than against it. The capacity to distinguish between these two categories of revelation is not given by the alternative framework any more than it is given by the conventional one. It has to be developed through the specific quality of honest, rigorous, assumption-questioning attention that genuine inquiry has always required. That development is what this channel is for, not the delivery of a complete and coherent alternative narrative to replace the conventional one. The building of the specific quality of consciousness that can navigate the genuine complexity of what the evidence is showing, that can hold the real weight of the convergence without inflating it beyond what the evidence supports, that can preserve the genuine uncertainty without retreating from the genuine significance of what the evidence points toward, that can follow the hidden truth wherever it actually leads without being pulled off course by the desire for a destination that is more complete and more certain than the evidence warrants. That quality of consciousness is what the moment requires. Not believers in a particular alternative narrative. Genuine inquirers, people whose relationship to the evidence is characterized by the specific combination of genuine openness and genuine rigor that makes the difference between understanding and the replacement of one inadequate framework with another. People who can sit with the extraordinary nature of what the convergence is pointing toward and allow it to be as uncertain as it actually is while being as significant as it actually is simultaneously. People who have developed the capacity to be genuinely changed by what the evidence shows without being captured by any particular interpretation of what it shows. Those are the people this channel was built for. Those are the people whose engagement with this material, honest, rigorous, genuinely open to wherever the inquiry leads, is the most significant contribution to the collective process of understanding that the current moment requires. Not the people who come to this material already knowing what they will find. The people who come not knowing and are willing to stay not knowing until the evidence itself produces something more reliable than the desire for certainty. The hidden truth is worth that patience. Whatever its full dimensions, whatever the specific configuration of the reality that the conventional narrative has never been adequate to hold, it is worth the specific quality of honest, rigorous, patient inquiry that genuine truth has always required, and that no shortcut, however compelling the narrative it offers, has ever been able to replace. Keep inquiring. Keep following the evidence. Keep maintaining the distinction between what the evidence shows and what the desire for a complete picture adds to it. That distinction is not the enemy of the inquiry, it is its integrity. And the hidden truth, when it becomes visible, as it is becoming, through the convergence of revelations that this channel has been examining from every available angle, will be most fully received by the consciousness that has maintained that integrity all the way to the moment of its arrival. We will see you in the next layer.